Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, making a little tool to make a little part for a Japanese sword. So today I'll be showing the making of a fixture that's used to produce a small washer, this little sucker right here, known as a Seppa, which is used in Japanese swords. Now, today's video is not so much a how-to as a how to think about. In other words, today's project is really pretty complicated and tool-intensive, and it's not something that everybody's going to be able to do. So my point is not to tell you that what I'm doing is exactly something you want to copy. Instead, what I'll be trying to do is to show you some ways of thinking about stuff that you can make in your shop that'll help you to make better knives. Now, along the way, you might learn some cool stuff about Japanese swords. So first, a little background on this little part itself. Japanese swords are made to disassemble easily. The blade itself is made with a tapered tang. That taper allows you to carve a wooden handle which slides off and on so you can take the whole rig apart. Traditionally, Japanese swords often had several handles and scabbards, one that was used purely for storage, and one or more that would have been used to carry the sword around on a day-to-day basis or for use in battle. In order to keep this slide-on, slide-off handle from rattling around, these little Seppa were used to sandwich the guard known as a tsuba. Here you can see it on the mount that's still in progress. If the handle starts getting loose, you can just swap out these Seppa with slightly thicker models, in effect shimming the handle and allowing you to wedge it on nice and tight by driving in a tapered retention peg known as a mikugi that snugs everything up. So to me, the biggest hassle in making these handles is that since every piece of the sword's different, each and every part, including the Seppa, has to be hand fitted to the tang. That means filing and sawing little things out so that they fit exactly to the tang. So even if you buy pre-made Seppa, they still have to be hand fitted in order to properly seat themselves on that tang. So I've always made my own, which I can tailor to fit. So what I'll be making today is a fixture for producing them on my CNC machine. Now, before you go freaking out about making something on a CNC machine in this very traditional craft of making Japanese swords, look, they still have to be hand filed and they still have to be hand fitted. And, you know, most of the folks that make Japanese swords actually buy these pre-made from some supplier anyway. By making them myself, I can produce my own design exactly the way I want it, including variations. You can bevel the edge, scallop them, whatever, and then change those designs at will. You can also produce them in a variety of thicknesses, whereas if you buy commercial ones, they just come in a certain size. Sometimes when you're fitting them, you don't really like that particular thickness, but if you paid $50 for a pair of them, you're stuck with them. I used to produce the blanks with this little pair of dies, which I made more or less by hand a decade or so ago. You slide a blank piece of brass or copper or whatever into the first die, drive a tool through it that punches out the center hole, then put that into the second die, whack the corresponding tool with your hammer, and out comes a blank that you can then fine-tune by hand to fit the dimensions you need. These were made from O1, a hardenable steel. Basically, I drilled holes in them and then filed the holes out to fit. And then I drilled and tapped screws to space the two sides of the die together. The faces of the tools were also made from hardenable steel and then attached to mild steel handles. Again, all of the steel was hardened and all of it was made at least more or less by hand. And these worked okay, but just okay. Industrial blanking equipment presses down on the whole piece with big dies that allow the stock to feed smoothly and won't produce burrs that cause things to jam. Here you have basically a little slot that has to be wider than the stock so that you can accommodate a bunch of different stock sizes. The result of which is that burrs are produced and then those cause the stock to jam, and it really took me a lot of fiddling to get each piece out of the punch. The punch was quick, but then getting the excess stock out took a long time. It was easier than hand grinding or filing the entire thing, but not that much. So I wanted something with less fuss, quicker throughput, and more accuracy. The new approach will turn out a perfect ellipse every single time. So here's the design that I came up with in Fusion 360. Basically, you've got an aluminum base with some holes in it so that you can screw it down to a tool plate, or you can put it in a vise, either way. The blank will then go on the first position where the center hole, or nakagoana as it's known in Japanese, will be milled out. Then the blank is transferred to the second position where the perimeter is milled out and a chamfer is applied. And of course this involves having two little plates on top that press it down so that it won't fly off. This can be varied to produce all sorts of minor variations in shape or size. Fairly simple idea, but obviously not something you could execute without a CNC machine. So here we go, milling out the various pockets and drilling some holes. I'll tap the holes using a hand drill. I could do it on the Tormach, but tapping on my CNC machine takes much more tuning than just doing it by hand. I'll also produce the other little clampy bits on the mill. And here's how it looks when it's fully assembled. Does it work? Well, let's give it a shot. This is my first go, no practice run. Again, the design work for the Seppa and how you mill it out was done in Fusion 360. Then we'll throw it over to the Tormach. Whole thing works great. Now on to Op 2, mill, and chamfer. And there we have it. Now I can produce Seppa in a number of thicknesses, maybe using a number of different metals, maybe using various sizes and aesthetic details, and have them sitting in a drawer ready to go whenever I need them. They can be made from copper, brass, even theoretically silver or gold, traditional Japanese alloys like shakudo, laminated metals in the form of mokume or Damascus steel. I mean, the sky's the limit. So let's turn back to the general point that I was making at the beginning of this video. You know, once you've figured out how to make a decent knife, you'll start to see parts of the process that are basically just kind of stupid, repetitious labor. So anytime you can figure out a shortcut on that stuff, do it. Anytime you can make a jig or a fixture or a tool and die set that'll save you time or improve your quality, do it. There are some parts that I made completely by hand with a file or a hammer or a jeweler saw or whatever, and then later on I built little jigs and fixtures to speed up production. Maybe just to put the holes in similar places every time or whatever, but the idea was both to increase the quality and speed things up. And now I tend to use my Tormach for this type of thing. Once I might have used things like wood, for instance this punch used in making the little end caps known as kashira or kashiras that fit on the end of the handle. Now I'd use something a little more highly engineered, but they both actually work quite well. What I'm getting at is that everybody has to start with the tools that they have. 500 years ago, did they have CNC machines? Obviously not. They had files, they had abrasive stones, they had little saws. You know, that's basically it. But they were still capable of making really high quality work. So as a maker, half of the fun of making knives is deciding kind of what path to pursue as you're making that knife. I mean, there are a lot of times that a particular part, or maybe the whole knife itself, could be made with a file, a belt grinder, a disc grinder, a metal cutting bandsaw, jeweler's saw, hacksaw, sandpaper. I mean, you name it. All kinds of different tools can be used to do the exact same thing. Your job as a maker is to figure out the best way for you and the tools that you have and the goals that you have as a maker to produce that particular knife. And there's just not a single right answer. You want to do it your way. Often a jig or a fixture or a tool and die set will save you just a ton of work over time. Now that tool may be super simple or it may be complex, but as you get deeper into knife making, you'll find that often designing and building these little work savers can be as much fun as making the knives themselves. How you do it, that's up to you. Thanks for watching, guys. If you feel like you got something out of this video, don't forget to subscribe. Also, click on the link to Patreon for a great way to give back to the channel. Plus, check me out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Links in the description. If you want something sharp and pointy, maybe a gift for yourself or one of the cooler people in your life, check out my Tactics Armory website and pick up one of our tactical or outdoor knives. And finally, if you want to learn to make Hamones or Japanese swords, check out WalterSorrellsBlades.com, where you can find videos about how I make Hamones, as well as forging, mounting, polishing, and fittings for Japanese swords. Thanks, and see you soon.